I still remember the smell of my brother's apartment the day I finally decided to break the silence and drive out to see him. It smelled like stale takeout, damp laundry, and that specific brand of quiet desperation that settles into a space when someone has completely given up on themselves. Leo and I are identical twins, but looking at him that afternoon felt like staring into a funhouse mirror that had been warped by a decade of pure misery. We had the exact same jawline, the same hazel eyes, and the same slight cowlick on the left side of our hair. But where I stood tall, dressed in a tailored suit from my job at a firm downtown, Leo was hunched over on a cheap, sagging futon, wearing a faded gray hoodie that looked like it hadn't seen a washing machine in weeks. There were purple bruises under his eyes, not from a physical fist, but from the kind of chronic exhaustion that eats away at your soul when you are living in a psychological war zone. We hadn't spoken in almost 3 years, mostly because his wife, Sarah, had systematically cut him off from everyone who actually cared about him. She had started with his friends from college, then she moved on to our parents, and finally she targeted me. I was the biggest threat because I could look at Leo and see right through whatever lie he was trying to tell himself to survive. But that morning, he had sent me a text message that simply read, "I can't do this anymore, Ryan. Please." That was it. No context, no explanation. I left my office right in the middle of a Tuesday, ignored 3 calls from my manager, and drove 45 minutes out to the bleak suburban complex where he was renting a tiny 1-bedroom place under a fake name, just to get away from her for a few days. When he opened the door, he didn't even say hello. He just walked back to the futon and sat down, burying his face in his trembling hands. I closed the door behind me, locking it instinctively, and sat on the edge of a plastic milk crate across from him. The silence between us was heavy, filled with 30 years of shared history and the immediate, terrifying reality of what he had become. I asked him what happened, and it took him nearly 10 minutes just to find his voice. When he finally spoke, it sounded like sand scraping against concrete. He told me about the screaming matches that lasted until 4 in the morning, the way Sarah would lock him out of their house in the dead of winter without his car keys or his wallet, and how she had systematically emptied their joint bank accounts to ensure he could never afford a lawyer to leave her. But it wasn't just the financial or emotional isolation. It was the absolute demolition of his dignity. She had convinced everyone in their social circle that he was the unstable one, the abuser, the deadbeat, while she played the saintly, long-suffering wife to perfection on social media. Leo told me that the night before, things had reached a breaking point. He had uncovered a second phone in her car, filled with messages between her and a guy named Marcus, someone she had always described as just a coworker from her marketing agency. When Leo confronted her, she didn't deny it. She laughed in his face, told him he was half the man Marcus was, and then threatened to call the police and claim he had assaulted her if he ever mentioned the phone again. She knew exactly how the system worked, and she knew that in their quiet, affluent New England suburb, the police would take her word over his in a heartbeat. Leo was terrified. He was trapped in a beautiful colonial-style house that felt more like a maximum security prison, tied to a woman who was actively destroying his life just because she could. He looked up at me, his eyes glassy and completely hollow, and told me he was thinking about driving his car off the bridge on Route 9 just to make the noise stop. That was the moment something shifted inside me. A cold, dark anger took hold of my chest, tighter than anything I had ever felt before. I looked at my brother, my identical reflection, the boy I had shared a womb with, and I realized that if I let him go back to that house, he wasn't going to make it to the end of the year. I stood up, walked over to the small window looking out at the gray parking lot, and started thinking. The resemblance between us wasn't just close, it was absolute. If we dressed the same and kept our mouths shut, our own mother couldn't tell us apart from across a room. Sarah might think she knew every corner of Leo's mind, but she didn't know me. She didn't know that beneath my corporate exterior, I had a streak of pure ice when it came to protecting the people I loved. I turned back to Leo and told him my plan. At first, he thought I was losing my mind. He shook his head violently, telling me it was illegal, that it was insane, that Sarah would notice within 5 seconds. But I laid it out for him, piece by piece. He needed to disappear. He needed a place where no one could find him, where he could sleep for a month straight, eat actual food, and remember what it felt like to be a human being. I told him he was going to take my keys, go to my apartment in the city, use my key card to enter my secure building, and live my life. I had 2 weeks of saved-up paid time off that I hadn't used, and my job was mostly remote anyway. I could tell them I was dealing with a family emergency out of state. Meanwhile, I would take his wedding ring, his old Honda Civic, his phone, and his clothes. I would go back to his house in the suburbs. I would become Leo. It took me another 2 hours of arguing, begging, and literally showing him the logistics of how it would work before he finally relented. We traded clothes right there in that dim apartment. Putting on his oversized, worn-out hoodie felt like slipping into a heavy shroud of grief. I watched him put on my tailored suit, and for a second, it was like watching a ghost come back to life. He looked sharper, taller, just by wearing clothes that fit properly. I gave him a crash course on my apartment building's security system, where I kept the spare cash in my bedroom and the password to my personal laptop so he could watch movies or read without using anything connected to his old life. I told him to turn his phone off and hand it to me. From this moment on, he was Ryan, a single bachelor with a quiet apartment overlooking the river, and I was Leo, the broken husband returning to his master. The drive to his house in Connecticut was one of the longest hours of my life. I had to consciously force my shoulders to slouch, to mimic the defensive, defeated posture Leo had adopted over the last few years. I practiced lowering the pitch of my voice, making it sound hesitant, unsure of itself. Every time my phone buzzed in the cup holder with a text from Sarah, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The texts were brutal, even without context. "Where the hell are you? The gutters need to be cleared before it rains tonight. Don't make me ask again." And then 10 minutes later, "You are pathetic. Just stay out late like you always do so I don't have to look at your face." Reading those words written to my brother made my blood boil, but I had to swallow the rage. I had to remember that I wasn't there to fight her as Ryan. I was there to play the victim until I had enough leverage to bury her. I pulled into the long, paved driveway of the colonial house around 7 in the evening. The house looked picture-perfect from the outside, with manicured bushes and a pristine white porch, but to me, it looked like a mausoleum. I took a deep breath, slipped Leo's silver wedding band onto my left ring finger, and stepped out of the car. The cool autumn air hit my face, and I walked up the steps, my knees feeling strangely weak. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, immediately greeted by the scent of expensive lavender candles and the sharp, distinct sound of a woman's voice laughing from the kitchen. I walked down the hallway, my sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished hardwood floors. When I entered the kitchen, Sarah was standing by the island, pouring herself a glass of white wine. She was undeniably beautiful, in a cold, sharp-featured way, wearing a perfectly styled lounge set that probably cost more than Leo's monthly car payment. She didn't look up immediately when I entered. Instead, she let out a loud, theatrical sigh, setting the wine bottle down with a heavy thud. "Look what decided to drag itself home," she said, her voice dripping with a casual, practiced cruelty that made me want to reach across the counter and snap the wine glass in her hand. "You look even more miserable than usual, Leo. Did you spend the whole afternoon crying in your car again?" I didn't answer right away. I forced myself to look down at the floor, letting my shoulders drop even lower, embodying the shadow of my brother. I kept my voice small, barely a whisper, as I gave her the first response of my new life. "I was just thinking," I said. Sarah let out a sharp, mocking laugh, taking a sip of her wine as she walked right past me, purposely brushing her shoulder against mine hard enough to make me step back. "Well, try doing less thinking and more working," she snapped, heading toward the living room. "The garage door is sticking again. Fix it before tomorrow morning, or I'm calling a repairman and taking it out of your personal allowance." I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty doorway where she had just been. My hands were clenched into tight fists inside the pockets of Leo's old hoodie. The game had officially begun, and as I looked around the pristine, suffocating kitchen, I realized that living with this monster was going to be far more dangerous than I had ever anticipated. I spent my first night in Leo's house sleeping on a narrow, uncomfortable leather sofa in the basement. Apparently, this was another one of Sarah's rules. Whenever he displeased her or failed to complete his never-ending list of chores to her exact impossible standards, he was banished downstairs. The basement was cold, damp, and smelled of old cardboard boxes, but to me, it was a sanctuary, because it meant I didn't have to lie in a bed next to a woman who made my skin crawl. I lay awake for hours, staring at the dark wooden beams of the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of her footsteps pacing across the floorboards directly above my head. Every creak of the house felt like a reminder of the tightrope I was walking. If I moved too quickly, spoke too confidently, or stood too straight, the whole illusion would shatter. The next morning, the torment began at dawn. A sharp, rhythmic banging on the basement door woke me up at exactly 6 o'clock. "Get up," Sarah's voice echoed down the stairs, harsh and demanding. "The kitchen is a mess, and I want Starbucks before my 8 o'clock conference call. Don't make me come down there." I dragged myself off the sofa, my muscles aching from the stiff leather, and rubbed the sleep from my eyes. I pulled Leo's faded hoodie back over my head, deliberately letting my posture slump into that familiar, beaten-down curve before I walked up the stairs. When I entered the kitchen, she was already dressed for work, looking flawless in a cream-colored pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled back into a sleek, professional ponytail. She didn't even look at me as she shoved a crumpled $20 bill into my hand. A large iced blonde vanilla latte with oat milk and a warmed-up turkey bacon sandwich. If it's cold when you get back, you're driving back to get another one. I took the money, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the hardwood floor, and nodded quietly. I mumbled a soft, "Okay," making sure to mimic the exact hesitant inflection Leo used when he was trying to avoid a blow-up. Driving Leo's old Honda Civic to the local coffee shop gave me my first real chance to breathe and inspect his phone. He had given me his passcode before we switched, and as soon as I sat in the parking lot of the strip mall, I opened his messages. My chest tightened as I scrolled through months of text threads. The sheer volume of psychological abuse was staggering. There were hundreds of messages from Sarah calling him worthless, threatening to ruin his career, and reminding him that nobody would ever believe his side of the story if he tried to leave. But then I looked deeper, searching for the evidence Leo had mentioned. I found a hidden vault app disguised as a calculator. Leo had told me the combination, and when I typed it in, the screen opened to a treasure trove of screenshots he had managed to take from Sarah's secondary phone. There were photos of her and Marcus at a luxury resort in Newport, Rhode Island, taken over a weekend when she had told Leo she was away at a mandatory leadership retreat. The text messages between them were disgusting, filled with jokes about how clueless Leo was and how they were going to use his hard-earned money to fund their next vacation. Marcus was a senior partner at her marketing firm, a wealthy, arrogant guy who clearly enjoyed the thrill of helping Sarah dismantle her husband's life. But the most alarming part of the cache was a series of drafts Leo had saved, notes documenting the times she had physically blocked him from leaving rooms, thrown heavy glass objects at his head, and scratched his arms, only to immediately threaten to call the police on him if he bled on the carpet. I sat in the car, the engine idling roughly, feeling a toxic mixture of intense grief for my brother and a burning, calculating desire for revenge. I realized that simply exposing her affair wouldn't be enough to save Leo. In a bitter divorce battle, she would still try to paint him as the unstable, abusive partner, and with her polished public image, she might actually win. I needed undeniable, real-time proof of her true nature. I needed her to expose herself in a way that no judge, no lawyer, and none of her upper-class friends could ever deny. When I got back to the house, I handed her the Starbucks order. She snatched it from my hands, took a sip of the latte, and immediately frowned. "This is lukewarm," she said, her voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. I felt my pulse quicken, but I stayed in character, lowering my head. "I'm sorry," I said, making my voice tremble slightly. The line at the drive-thru was backed up into the street. Sarah took a step closer to me, invading my personal space, the scent of her expensive perfume filling my nose. It was the same tactic bullies use to establish dominance. "You are completely incompetent, Leo. You can't even handle a simple coffee run. I honestly don't know why I keep you around. You're lucky I have a heart, because anyone else would have thrown you out on the street years ago." She tossed the sandwich onto the kitchen counter, where it landed with a soft thud, and walked out of the house, slamming the front door behind her hard enough to rattle the glass panes. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I went to work. I had brought a small canvas duffel bag hidden under the spare tire in Leo's trunk, containing high-definition miniature spy cameras that I had purchased online a year ago for a corporate security audit at my own firm. They were tiny, no larger than a coat button, and could be easily concealed inside everyday household objects. Over the next 3 hours, I carefully installed them in key areas of the house, one inside a fake plant on top of the living room bookshelf, another disguised as a USB wall charger in the kitchen, and a third hidden in the corner of the master bedroom ceiling vent. All of them were connected to a secure, encrypted cloud server that I could access directly from Leo's phone. By the time afternoon rolled around, I decided to test the waters of her social circle. Leo's phone buzzed with an invitation to a neighborhood backyard barbecue that evening, hosted by a couple named the Addisons, who lived just 3 doors down. Sarah had already replied to the group chat, stating that she would love to come, adding a string of heart emojis and writing, "Leo has been having a rough time lately with his mental health, but I'm forcing him to get some fresh air." When Sarah returned home from work at 5, she found me sitting on the living room sofa, staring blankly at the wall to maintain the depressed facade. "Get dressed," she commanded, throwing her keys onto the entryway table. "We're going to the Addisons. Put on something that doesn't make you look like a homeless person. And remember, when people ask how you're doing, you smile, you thank them for asking, and you keep your mouth shut about your little episodes. I don't need you embarrassing me in front of the neighborhood association." I went downstairs, changed into a pair of Leo's clean khaki pants and a navy blue polo shirt, and walked back up. As we walked down the manicured suburban sidewalk toward the party, Sarah completely transformed. The cold, venomous scowl she had worn inside the house vanished, replaced by a warm, radiant, picture-perfect smile. She slipped her arm through mine, gripping my forearm with a tight, controlling pressure that felt like a pair of handcuffs. The barbecue was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Everywhere we walked, Sarah would subtly drop hints about my supposed instability to our neighbors. "Oh, Leo is hanging in there," she would whisper to a group of neighborhood wives, while I stood just a few feet away, pretending to examine the grill. "It's been so hard on both of us, but I'm doing everything I can to support him through this dark phase." The neighbors would look at me with a mixture of pity and mild disgust, completely sold on her narrative of the long-suffering, angelic wife dealing with a broken, defective husband. But the real shock came about an hour into the party. I was standing near the cooler, grabbing a bottle of water, when a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tailored linen shirt walked up next to me. It was Marcus. I recognized his arrogant smile and the expensive watch on his wrist instantly from the screenshots in Leo's Vault app. He reached into the cooler, pulled out a beer, and looked at me with a smirk that held absolutely no respect. "Hey there, Leo," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Sarah told me you were feeling a bit under the weather lately. Glad to see you made it out of the basement." I turned to look at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. The urge to smash the water bottle across his perfect teeth was almost overwhelming, but I forced my eyes to drop to the ground. I gripped the plastic bottle tightly, letting my knuckles turn white, playing the part of the cowardly, intimidated husband. "Yeah, I'm just trying to take it easy," I mumbled, keeping my voice low and submissive. Marcus chuckled, stepping closer and lowering his voice so the surrounding neighbors couldn't hear. "Good boy. Just stay out of trouble, okay? Sarah's got a lot of big projects coming up at the firm, and she doesn't need any distractions at home. Understand?" He patted me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt entirely like an owner asserting dominance over a dog, and then walked away toward Sarah. I watched from across the yard as she welcomed him with a bright smile, her hand lingering on his arm just a fraction of a second too long for a normal coworker. They stood there, laughing and talking, right in front of me, confident in the belief that they had completely broken the man whose life they were stealing. They had no idea that the broken man they were mocking was already gone, and that the man standing in his place was recording every single move they made. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life that felt like a slow-burning psychological thriller. By day, I was the reclusive, broken-down twin brother, absorbing Sarah's casual cruelty, cleaning her house and running her errands while keeping my eyes glued to the floorboards. But by night, down in that cold, damp basement, I became the architect of her destruction. Every evening, once the house fell silent and I heard the lock turn on her upstairs bedroom door, I would open Leo's phone and log into the cloud server to review the footage from the hidden cameras. The cameras caught everything. They caught her pacing around the kitchen while talking to Marcus on her secondary phone, openly discussing how they were going to manipulate the upcoming quarterly performance reviews to get Leo fired from his remote consulting contract. They caught her laughing about how easy it was to keep him trapped, bragging about how she had hidden his passport in the safety deposit box at her bank so he couldn't leave the country. But the most damning piece of footage came on a rainy Thursday night, 12 days into the switch. Marcus came over to the house while I was supposedly asleep in the basement. I watched the live feed on the phone screen from the darkness of the couch downstairs. They were sitting in the living room, drinking the expensive scotch my parents had given Leo for his 30th birthday. Marcus had his arm wrapped around her waist, and they were looking over a folder of financial documents. Through the high-definition microphone, I heard Sarah's voice clear as a bell. "Once the transfer goes through next month, the house will be entirely under the LLC's name," she said, tapping a document with her manicured fingernail. "He signed the power of attorney paperwork last year when he was deeply depressed, thinking I was just handling the bills. He has no idea that the moment the title transfers, I can file for a fault-based divorce, cite his mental instability, and evict him within 48 hours. He'll be left with nothing but his clothes and his stupid old car."
Marcus leaned over and kissed her cheek, a smug, repulsive grin on his face. "You're a genius, babe. The guy doesn't even have the spine to stand up to you when you yell at him. He's just gonna take it." "He doesn't have a choice," Sarah whispered, her eyes flashing with a cold, predatory light that sent chills down my spine. "Who is he gonna call? His brother? Ryan hasn't spoken to him in years. He's completely alone." I sat there in the dark, my body shaking with a feral, concentrated rage. They weren't just cheating. They were committing systematic, legal identity theft, trying to cast my brother out onto the street with a ruined reputation and a broken mind. But as angry as I was, a grim smile spread across my face. She had just confessed to financial fraud, marital misconduct, and psychological coercion on a high-definition, time-stamped video recording. I downloaded the file, backed it up to 3 separate external cloud drives, and sent a copy to a trusted, high-profile divorce attorney downtown who happened to owe me a massive favor from a corporate contract audit I had handled for his firm the previous year. The next morning, I received a text from Leo using my old burner phone. It was the first time he had reached out since the switch. "Ryan, I checked into a clinic under your name like we discussed. I've been talking to a therapist. For the first time in 5 years, my head feels clear. I can sleep without panic attacks. How are things at the house?" I felt a sudden, profound wave of relief wash over me. The plan was working. While I was taking the blows in the arena, my brother was finally healing, putting the pieces of his shattered mind back together in a safe, secure environment where Sarah's poison couldn't reach him. I texted him back immediately. "Stay put, keep resting. The trap is set, and she's about to walk right into it. I'm bringing you your life back, brother." The climax of the trap arrived on Saturday night. Sarah had organized an intimate dinner party at the house to celebrate Marcus's promotion to senior managing partner at the marketing agency. She had invited 6 of their wealthiest, most influential neighborhood friends, including the Addisons, along with the executive vice president of the firm, the man who held Marcus's career in his hands. For 3 days prior, Sarah had treated me like a rented mule. I was forced to scrub the outdoor patio, polish the silver, and prep a 3-course catering menu she had ordered. "If you ruin tonight, Leo," she had warned me, cornering me against the kitchen counter with a pointed finger, "I swear to God I will make your life a living hell. You are to serve the drinks, set the platters, and then you are to disappear downstairs. If you say a single word to the vice president, I will call the police and tell them you threatened to hit me. Do you understand me?" I looked down, nodding meekly, letting a fake tear slip down my cheek to give her the ultimate satisfaction of total control. "I understand, Sarah. I'll stay out of the way." By 7 in the evening, the guests had arrived. The house was filled with the sounds of clinking wine glasses, smooth jazz, and the pretentious chatter of the local upper class. I stood in the kitchen wearing a crisp white button-down shirt and black slacks, playing the part of the submissive, silent house husband. I walked around the living room with a tray of appetizers, serving the very people who had spent months whispering about my brother's supposed madness behind his back. Marcus was in his element, holding a glass of champagne, loudly telling a story about a high-budget client he had supposedly saved, while Sarah stood beside him, her eyes beaming with pride and ambition. Around 9 o'clock, the dinner wrapped up, and the guests migrated back to the living room for dessert and coffee.
Sarah stood up, raising her glass to command the room's attention. "Everyone, if I could have a moment," she said, her voice dripping with charm. "Tonight is so special. Marcus has worked so hard for this promotion, and we are so incredibly proud of him. I actually put together a small digital slideshow of his best campaigns over the last year, just to show our executive VP exactly why Marcus is the future of this company." A round of polite applause rippled through the room.
Marcus gave a humble, practiced nod, raising his glass toward the large 75-inch smart television mounted above the fireplace. Sarah picked up the remote control from the mantel, smiling radiantly as she connected her phone to the screen via AirPlay. "Leo, turn off the overhead lights, please," she ordered smoothly, not even looking at me. I walked over to the wall switch and flipped the lights down, plunging the room into a warm, dim ambiance. The television screen flashed, displaying a title slide that read, "Celebrating Marcus's Leadership." Sarah pressed the button on her remote to start the video. But the video that began playing wasn't a slideshow of marketing campaigns. Suddenly, the ambient jazz music was cut off by the loud, static-heavy sound of a woman's laughter. The screen cut sharply to a night vision, wide-angle view of the very living room everyone was currently sitting in. On the screen, Sarah and Marcus were clearly visible on the sofa, drinking scotch, with the financial folders spread across their laps. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the audio from the television, booming through the surround sound speakers. Once the transfer goes through next month, the house will be entirely under the LLC's name. Sarah's recorded voice echoed through the room, crystal clear. He signed the power of attorney paperwork last year when he was deeply depressed. "I can file for a fault-based divorce, cite his mental instability, and evict him within 48 hours. He'll be left with nothing but his clothes and his stupid old car." On screen, Marcus could be seen kissing her cheek, his recorded voice laughing. "You're a genius, babe. The guy doesn't even have the spine to stand up to you. He's just going to take it." The silence in the real living room was deafening. I stood by the light switch, watching Sarah's face turn from a look of confused irritation to a mask of sheer, unadulterated horror. The color completely drained from her skin, leaving her looking like a chalk corpse in the dim light. Marcus froze, his champagne glass hovering inches from his mouth, his eyes wide with a sudden, suffocating panic. The neighborhood friends stared at the screen, then at Sarah, then at Marcus, their mouths hanging open in utter shock. The executive vice president's face turned a dark, furious shade of crimson as he slowly set his drink down on the coffee table. Sarah scrambled wildly for the remote, her fingers trembling so hard she dropped it onto the hardwood floor. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice losing all its polished elegance, reverting to the shrill, unhinged tone I had heard in the kitchen for the last 2 weeks. "Leo, you pathetic piece of garbage, what did you do? Turn it off!" I didn't move. I stood up perfectly straight, casting off the slouched, defeated posture of my brother for the first time in 14 days. I rolled my shoulders back, reached over, and flipped the overhead lights back on, flooding the room with bright, unforgiving white light. I looked directly into Sarah's terrified eyes, and for the first time since I had entered her house, I smiled. The panic in the room was a living, breathing thing. Sarah was down on her hands and knees on the rug, frantically clawing at the dropped remote control, her expensive cream-colored pantsuit catching the dust from the floor she had forced my brother to clean just hours prior. Marcus stepped forward, his face a twitching mask of corporate fear and adrenaline, his eyes darting toward the executive vice president, who was already standing up and adjusting his blazer with a look of absolute disgust. "This is a setup," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking as he looked around at the affluent neighbors who were already recoiling away from him. "Sir, this is a deepfake. This is an unstable man's sick revenge fantasy. You know Leo's history. You know he's had psychological issues. Shut your mouth, Marcus," the vice president barked, his voice cutting through the room like a meat cleaver. He didn't even look at Sarah. He turned his eyes directly to me, seeing the way I was standing, no longer slouched, no longer trembling, looking him dead in the eye with the calm confidence of an executive who had spent his entire career running boardrooms downtown. The VP looked at me, then back to the screen, where the video had automatically looped, showing Sarah bragging about hiding passports and forging LLC transfers. "You've got 24 hours to have your resignation on my desk, Marcus.
If I see your FATP agency on Monday, I will personally ensure the board hands over every transaction you've touched to the state prosecutor. We are done here. The Addisons and the other neighborhood couples didn't wait for an invitation to leave. They scrambled out of the living room in a flurry of muttered apologies, grabbing their coats and abandoning their half-eaten desserts. The front door clicked shut behind them, leaving only the heavy, suffocating silence of the house, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Sarah finally managed to grab the remote and hit the power button, plunging the television into darkness. She stood up slowly, her breathing ragged, her blonde hair coming loose from her perfect ponytail. The mask of the upper-class suburban wife was entirely gone. What was left was the raw, ugly reality of a cornered predator. She glared at me, her eyes bloodshot, her manicured nails digging into the palms of her hands. "You think you're smart, Leo?"
she hissed, her voice dropping into that vile, quiet register she usually reserved for the basement stairs. "You think a little video is going to save you? Look at you. You're a broke, pathetic loser. I own this house. I own the cars. I have the best divorce lawyers in the county on retainer. By Monday morning, I will have a restraining order filed against you for domestic harassment. I will tell the judge you installed illegal hidden cameras to spy on me in my own home. You will be sleeping in your car by midnight, you miserable piece of trash." I didn't answer right away. I slowly walked over to the kitchen island, pulled out a high-top stool, and sat down, crossing my legs comfortably. I reached into the pocket of Leo's old navy polo shirt, pulled out my true personal cell phone, the one I had kept completely dark for 2 weeks, and laid it flat on the counter. I tapped the screen, illuminating a text message thread that had been active for the last 20 minutes. "You really should pay more attention to details, Sarah," I said, my voice completely abandoning Leo's soft, hesitant pitch. I spoke with my natural tone, deep, resonant, and entirely devoid of fear. Sarah froze. She stared at me, her head tilting slightly to the side as her brain desperately tried to process the sudden change in the man standing before her. Marcus, who was leaning against the fireplace mantel looking like he was about to vomit, looked up sharply. "What is wrong with your voice?" she whispered, a sudden, cold seed of doubt planting itself in her chest. "My name isn't Leo," I said simply. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small leather wallet, and flipped it open on the counter, revealing my New York driver's license. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes darting between the plastic card and my face. When she saw the name, Ryan Alexander, and the metropolitan address, the breath completely left her lungs. "No," she breathed, stumbling back a step until her hips hit the living room sofa. "No, that's impossible. You're Leo. I know my husband." "You don't know anything about him," I replied, standing up and leaning over the counter, letting the full weight of my presence fill the space. "You spent 5 years breaking a gentle, kind man because you knew he didn't have the stomach for cruelty. You thought you isolated him from everyone who loved him, but you forgot about me. You forgot that Leo has a twin who spent the last 10 years building a career in corporate forensics, dealing with people 10 times smarter and more dangerous than you and your little boyfriend over there." Marcus let out a low groan, burying his face in his hands as the realization of what they had done fully set in. 2 weeks ago, Leo walked out of that apartment complex and drove straight into a private, high-end wellness facility under my name, I continued, my voice ice cold. "While you've been treating me like a dog, my brother has been gaining weight, sleeping 8 hours a night, and talking to a medical team that has fully documented the severe psychological trauma you inflicted on him. And while I was here cleaning your baseboards, my firm's forensic accountants were tracing every single dollar you moved out of Leo's consulting accounts into that shell LLC." Sarah's face went from pale to completely translucent. "That's illegal," she stammered, her voice rising to a frantic, unhinged shriek. "You impersonated him. That's fraud. None of that video evidence will hold up in court. My lawyers will throw it out in 5 minutes." "The marital misconduct video from tonight?" "Maybe," I said, tilting my head. "But the video of you and Marcus discussing how you forged his signature on the power of attorney paperwork to transfer the deed of this house? That went straight to the State Insurance and Financial Fraud Division an hour ago. And since I am an external third party who installed security equipment in a home where my biological brother requested a security audit, the chain of custody is perfectly legal. My attorney downtown has already filed an emergency freeze on all your assets, Sarah.
As of right now, your credit cards are dead, your joint accounts are locked, and that fancy lawyer you think you have on retainer, you don't have the funds to pay his hourly rate anymore." Right on cue, the high-pitched whine of a police siren echoed from the main road, growing louder and closer with every passing second. The red and blue lights began to flash through the large front windows of the colonial home, casting long, rhythmic shadows across the pristine hardwood floors. Sarah looked at the window, then back at me, her lips trembling so violently she could barely form words. "Ryan, please, you don't understand. Leo was impossible to live with. He was depressed, he was dragging me down." "Save it for the deposition," I interrupted, picking up my phone and walking toward the front entry hallway. I unlocked the door just as 2 local police cruisers pulled up into the driveway, their headlights cutting through the Connecticut drizzle. I stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the fresh, damp autumn air. For the first time in 2 weeks, the heavy weight in my chest was completely gone. I pulled Leo's silver wedding band off my left ring finger, dropped it onto the small side table by the door, and watched as the officers walked up the steps. 3 days later, I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment in the city, watching the sunset reflect off the river. The door behind me opened, and Leo walked out, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked different. His shoulders were back, his hair was neatly cut, and the hollow, haunted look in his hazel eyes had been replaced by a quiet, steady peace. He handed me a cup, leaning against the railing next to me. The divorce papers had been served to Sarah in her holding cell the morning after the dinner party. Marcus had fled the state to live with his parents in Ohio, his career in shambles, while the marketing firm launched a full internal audit into his expenses. The house was being put on the market, with 100% of the proceeds legally locked for Leo's future. Leo took a slow sip of his coffee, looking out at the city skyline. "It's quiet here," he said softly. "It is," I replied. He turned to look at me, a genuine, tearful smile breaking across his identical face for the first time in a decade. "Thank you, Ryan, for giving me my life back." I smiled, clinking my coffee mug against his. "I didn't give you your life back, brother. I just cleared the garbage out of the way. The rest is up to you."